been a bit busy this week and didn't really have a chance to do any research on broader subjects, so I thought if nothing else I could do a brief review of a watch I recently picked up, and that's the Seiko 6139-8050. Now, while I'd like to do a later video that goes into more detail on the history of Seiko chronographs, for the purpose of this video, basically, in the 70s, they had two lines of chronographs, the 6100 series and the 7000 series. The 6100 series consisted of the 6138, which was a chronograph that had a 12-hour timer, like the bullhead here. And the 6139, which only had a 30-minute chronograph, like we have here. Over the last few years, the 6139s have started to grow in popularity, and this one is probably the best example of that, the so-called Pogue, or this is, I guess, technically a variant, but it has a very bright yellow dial. This was also not quite new old stock, but a fairly accurate representation of what this would have looked like when it was released in the 70s. And it's a pretty bright yellow dial, and it's, again, for the 70s, there was a lot of experimentation with different colors. So, an example of yellow, here's a 6139 6015, which is a really nice bright blue, which I've talked about before. There's my little flea market find that took forever to reassemble correctly. And we had a very 70s brown 6138 bullhead, which looks much nicer with a new crystal. So most of these colors are very 70s. It's a very 70s aesthetic. So we did have that, but green is a color that was a bit more out there, and it was harder to really find watches that had that particular color. It was, to my knowledge, only a JDM model, and that's why it has the speed timer designation. And it's not really terribly desirable or really even well documented. But the thing that really caught my eye was the beautiful green dial, and also the syringe hands, which are unique to my knowledge for Seiko chronos of the 70s. It has a bit of a weird shape to it, in that it's a bit squished and not as long as a normal standard, I guess you could call it, watch case. And it also looks as if it's almost made of multiple parts, as you can see right here in the opening. As far as functionality, it's a basic 6139. I need to open up, I need to switch out the gaskets for the pushers. Gaskets have hardened up, so you see the pusher doesn't release fully. So to take care of that, you switch out the gaskets on that. But the other interesting thing about this is it's in excellent condition from a watch from 1974. It really has minimal scratching relative terms to its age, and my experience of the way watches from this time period usually look, and it's actually never been opened. So I need to put some time aside, make sure I carefully open things. Incidentally, this also came in a shade of blue, which I think doesn't look quite as nice as this beautiful green dial. And I thought it was appropriate to get this green because I had recently picked up this 3923, which is a different shade of green. And I really think they match, and really in bright light, it's such a pretty dial in both cases. This one being much more shiny and this one being matte. And as you see, the counter will go on and run 30 minutes. You see the pusher is still stuck here. You could sometimes pull it out, but again, I just need to switch out the gaskets. The other thing I wanted to bring up with this, and this is really minor, but sort of interesting, is the clasp. Now this particular clasp has an extension piece right here, which wasn't that uncommon for watches in the 70s. But the interesting thing is, this extension piece doesn't have a spring in it. So it just allows for you to extend it in a rigid manner, which is really interesting because the JDM, Japan Domestic Market, speed timer bullhead actually had a spring-loaded extender put in. Now, the nice thing about this one is, and first of all, it's not really possible to break it since it's just a piece of metal, but it's the same width on each side, so replacing it wouldn't be terribly difficult. Whereas the annoying thing with this bullhead is the extender is different widths. It narrows, whoops, it narrows as you go in there, and replacing the part is an enormous pain. And to be frank, I've not been able to so far, so I had to rebuild it, and that really was not fun because there's a spring in there and you have to unfold metal. But you have two different examples of extenders like that, which I thought was a bit of an interesting footnote for their sports watches of the 70s. In both cases, clasps, say the same thing, Seiko 5 Sports. Last little bit, the crown here is really difficult to grasp to set the time. I end up having to grasp it with my nails to hold it. It really doesn't come out that much. So it's one thing to keep in mind if you happen to be interested in getting this watch. Value-wise, again, I don't really think they're terribly desirable, which I think is, if you happen to be interested in watches like this, is really a good thing. But the dial just is so pretty in the bright light, and I think it works well with the orange second hand and even the orange speed timer. So not that much to say on it, but it's really one of the less popular speed timers out there. So I thought I'd produce a little bit of information on it. It was only made for a few years in the mid-70s to my knowledge, and it wears really nicely on the wrist. I think definitely this looks better on a bracelet than on any other kind of strap, so if you're going to look out for these, try to get it on the original bracelet, because Seiko chronos of the 70s usually look really strange if you don't have it on the bracelet. They're really well proportioned with it. And that's about it for this video, and as usual, thanks for watching.